ahead and analyze 267 Chevy V8, see if it's worth working with or not working with, if it's even worth your time. Just in a nutshell, the 267, it has a 3.5 inch bore size. It's extremely small. That's the biggest hiccup and handicap of a 267. It has a 3.48 inch stroke. That's the same as a 305 or a 350. We're going to go ahead and list the cons here. The engine's considerably smaller. Bore size, too small. Engine block casting is too thin, meaning if you want to bore this engine out more, good luck. 30 thousandths is probably about the max limit on these engines. They were made from, I believe it was 1979, 1981. The rebuild costs are just too high as well. I mean, there's so many people rebuilding 350s and other small blocks that, you know, they just don't rebuild these. So if you want oversized pistons, they're probably going to cost you quite a bit. Okay, and the pros of this engine is the engine size is small, meaning it you know, might use low fuel. Crankshaft, rods, other parts, etc. Everything except the pistons and block will interchange with other small block Chevys. In a pinch, here's something that could be done with the 267 that I thought of. In a pinch, an early 1968 to 69 thick cast 307 block with 0 core shift. If you could find that, it could possibly be safely bored to 4 inches, which would be an 1/8 inch overbore, which is huge. I mean, we're talking, you know, almost 5 overbores. But, you know, some of those early 68, 69 blocks, they had a lot of meat to them. And, you know, if you have your camshaft bores just dead center, you know, meaning there's no core shift in this block at all. You look at your freeze plugs, they're all concentric around the outer surface. Anyway, you know, moving on, you know, you could use that 267 crankshaft, a set of 350 Chevy pistons, and, you know, you can make a you know, Frankenstein 350. And 350s are getting harder to come by. All right, I did have some analysis here on this this engine, and I'll just go ahead and run down my synopsis of the 267, why it won't work. Okay, 267 would need to not only use a 3-inch stroke to give it a decent bore to stroke ratio. That would turn it into a 234. The entire assembly would need to be reduced in weight by 200 pounds. And I'm talking every part of the engine. Or, in other words, 33% of the weight needs to be removed just to match the unsprung weight characteristics of a 350. By unsprung weight, I'm talking about flywheel weight that's moving when the engine's running. And that's important because, you know, it'll change the way the engine revs and behaves when you're using it. The final insult to injury is the vehicle weight would also need to be reduced by 33% in weight and drag coefficient. You know, ensure a 234 cubic inch Chevy V8 would get 25 to 30 miles per gallon, but with 0 creature comforts due to the car, due to its chassis weight reduction. And, you know, the car would look awful as well because, I mean, you're reducing the drag coefficient. So, I mean, essentially you're trying to turn a car into an airplane belly pan or something. It's my belief that the 267 was the Hail Mary pass attempt to comply with the greasing emissions while maximizing profits. And we're just going to go ahead and throw this out. At the time, people were more interested in paying more for a car that had a V8 in it versus one that had an inline 6. They didn't really look at how much power it made because at the time, you know, a lot of the horsepower ratings are really taking a nosedive anyway, so they didn't really care. Hail Mary pass, let's see here. 3.5 inch bore makes it virtually impossible to modify in any way that would easily move a car weighing more than 2,000 pounds. So think about that. You know, you're going to find a really light car. Maybe like an early 70s Opel or something like that. You know, it would have to be a car that's just so light. And then the engine, that small block Chevy engine is heavy for that kind of a car. and this is going. This is comparing the 350 engine to the 267. The 350 engine being installed in a 3,200-pound car, which is pretty normal. That'd be like a Nova or something like that, or Camaro. The crankshaft stroke would be significantly reduced to make a more horsepower-friendly bore-to-stroke ratio. And we're talking like a 3-inch stroke. The 234 engine is just simply too small to do much more than be a novelty noisemaker. Not saying that it couldn't be done, but should it? And I don't think so. Chevy V8s are a wonderful source of modifiable engines that I've enjoyed over the years, but I'd like to think all of them are great, but it's simply not the case. So some are more useful being turned back into parts because just be blunt, a lot of these engines were assembled from parts that GM already had. But turn them back into parts. If you have a 267, how do you identify this engine? Well, it's got tiny bores. They're 3.5 inches. You can usually figure that out with a tape measure. Usually on the engine block somewhere around the back where the casting number is. I think it's back in this area right here. That's the driver's side. It actually says 267 right on the engine. It's stamped right in it. But 267s, I wouldn't build one personally. The only thing that they're good at is if you have a healthy one that runs well and you're only going to use it for stock use. I wrote a little note here saying on a side note, I understand 267s aren't all junk. They all have 305 heads. Of course, they're low-performance 450 castings with the 172 valve intake. But they're fine for a 305 if you have a cracked head, and you will. 450 heads cracked. Being as how 267s has the same crankshaft stroke as a 305 and 350, and I'm listening to the details on, using a 307 block to create a 350. Because a 3.875 307 bore, it's only an 1/8 inch from being a 4-inch. There's no replacement for displacement. Know that. You can't take a 305 and make the same power as a 350 by giving a performance cam and headers and all these performance gimmicks. They do create horsepower, but it sacrifices torque and it raises the power band. So you're just not going to get the same kind of engine dynamic as like a stock 350. So just go with the bigger engine. There's no replacement for displacement. Well, what's wrong with the 267? Well, you're just going to use it for parts. There's really nothing wrong with it. I don't think I'd pay more than $50 for a complete 267 myself, especially one that was, probably worn out. Because, the heads are probably worth, I'm just going to say $25 because they're not worth $50 because one's probably cracked, if not both of them. A big problem that they made with the 267s was that they used an intake that had just too big of port runners, and they used the front half 2-barrel carburetor of the Quadrajet, and it was just a very lean carburetor. I don't know why, but they